Hey, church. We're just gonna pass the mic around just to introduce ourselves first, just names and pronouns. My name's Viv. Any pronouns are cool with me.
Hi, church. My name is Lauren, and my pronouns are she, her.
Hey, Forefront. My name is M. Pronouns are they, them.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Olivia. Pronouns are she or they.
Hi, I'm Tara. Good morning. She or they.
Hi, I'm Rosie. They, them.
Thank you, church, for having us. I pray protection over us and for all of us. We're going to be having a brave, personal conversation about our own stories, and if this brings up any sort of tender feelings for anyone in the room, I just really encourage you to take care of yourself, protect yourself and one another and us, and if you need to step out at any point, please do so, and just, listen to your body and what you need. So we're going to just begin with a couple of breaths to center all of us. So if you want to center yourself, get comfortable in your seat, and just reground in your place. I do this for us as well up here. And you can take a big deep breath in and out. Twice more like that, in and out. Last one, in and out. We are here. So before we pass to the personal stories of our panel, our scripture is full of stories of people who couldn't have children the quote-unquote normal way. And yet, time and time again, God opens radical possibilities, impossible openings where conventional doors have closed. In the book of Genesis, Sarah was almost 100 years old when she conceived Isaac, and she laughed when she heard the news. So those of us that feel aging, Bible stories of Rebecca, Rachel, Hannah, and Samson's mother each struggle with infertility and aging before they bear pivotal children. The pattern culminates with Elizabeth, who is deemed geriatric and infertile, who conceives John the Baptist. And then it goes on to the Virgin Mary, who is divinely inseminated to conceive baby Jesus. So the Bible's most significant birth givers, from Sarah, Hannah, Rachel, Rebecca, Elizabeth, to the Virgin Mary, are not exceptions to some rule. They are a pattern. And we see that chosen, struggled for, seemingly impossible and long-awaited family is the biblical story. And I'm really grateful for this family of Forefront and for the courage of our panelists in our Forefront community who have agreed to share some of their stories. So we're going to bounce around and share a bit. I'm going to pass it first to M.
All right, I know we sort of ended there in the happier times of our infertile ladies, but I want you to kind of journey back with me to January of 2023. I had just had 2 extremely serious relationships implode. My doing a lot of it. They're doing some of it. If you're watching, you know who you are. And I had given up. I was done. But was I? Because every night I would crawl into my single bed, turn on Grey's Anatomy, millennials out there, put my radius to 1 mile on Tinder, and just swipe. If you've ever gotten to the end of Tinder when it says there are no more possible matches, it's a sacred club, and I tip my hat to you. So the line essentially between delusional and unhinged and hope was really thin for me. And still, when I would close my eyes and go into that room of my heart, all I could hear was, I want to be the dad that gets donuts on a Saturday. Yeah. Not even like I want to be a dad. I was like, I want to be the dad that gets donuts on a Saturday. That was my one glimmer, my seed that I held on to because, of course, my dad got donuts on a Saturday morning. But I just had zero idea of how this would be possible. Like, first of all, this is stereotypical, but non-binary people just generally don't carry. So it's like, it's kind of a no-go for me. Being pregnant, God love you, who wants to be pregnant out there, can't do it. Out of alien, I don't get it. Love it that you do. Not signing up for that. And at the time, I was just like way too obsessed with work to really like step aside and heal myself, to be able to partner and raise. And then I got matched with a gardener who liked me because I like animals. Mic drop. If I could drop this, if this were my property, I would drop this because that's what I was looking for. And so I went on a first date. And my first date, when you're 35 and older, here's how the questions go. 1, what's wrong with you? Really? 2, generally, if you're white, where are you on a white supremacy journey? 3, how do you feel about Palestine? And then it's usually, that's like minute 5, and you know, okay, we're gonna keep going. So I did all those, but because I was sitting across from this non-binary southern hunk with a mullet, a farmer's tan, and these ripped biceps, and real Carhartt, not work in progress Carhartt, but real Carhartt, I decided to go for the 4th question I have never asked, which was, when do you start to use the names you had set aside for your children, but instead name your animals? And Marin looks at me dead in the eyes and says with full confidence, oh, I want to have children, and I want to carry. So I'm hanging off the stool because how? And yeah, so I'm like, okay, let's just push this to either the ick factor or I'm gonna get down on one knee. So I was like, okay, what's the name? Like, give it to me. I'm not gonna name the names that would have caused me ick, but you know what they are. And Marin said the name, and it was just this moment of, I was flashed into my past, I was flashed into my present, and all there on a bar on Kingston Avenue. I knew that was the name of my kid, that we were hopefully gonna carry together. And today Marin's pregnant. Yeah. So that baby is present today, 3rd row, I see you, in utero, and like beginning in September, like depending on the sex, right? We might get to name that name, and make that a reality. So yeah.
Well, I don't know how to follow that, but hi everyone, my name is Lauren. And just to piggyback off your story, I always wanted a pug named Gizmo, and I finally got that pug named Gizmo. And 20 years ago, I always wanted a son named Dash, but I didn't think I would ever have children until I turned 35. I never really originally pictured myself becoming a parent. And, but once I got there, something shifted drastically because I came from such a small family. I was an only child. I started imagining creating a family of my own and nurturing the kind of closeness I always longed for. I do have 3 older half-sisters, but we didn't grow up together, so I never really had experience around younger kids at all. I had literally never changed a diaper before my son was born. I didn't know what I was doing. And no one told me how. There was a lot of accidents. So there was no handbook for me. Everything became trial and error. And there's never a handbook for becoming a parent or just being a human in general. So my fertility journey started with 2 unsuccessful IUI attempts. I was taking Clomid, which is a hormone that they put you on, and honestly, those hormones made me feel emotionally all over the place. After that, I transitioned to IVF. What people don't realize is how physically, emotionally, mentally, and financially consuming IVF becomes. And before I could even start, doctors discovered that I had a baseball-sized fibroid and endometriosis, and I needed additional surgery. So I had like 3 surgeries before I could even start my process. Then came choosing a sperm donor, which was just as important a decision as my decision to become a parent. I mean, that was hard. It's like Tinder, you kept swiping. Yeah. There's like, filters in the sperm bank that I had to filter out what was important to me. Definitely 6 feet tall and taller, because I'm only 5'2". That was really important. Sorry, I digress. I'm really nervous, sorry. So the daily hormone shots, constant monitoring, early morning appointments before work, like I was there at 5 a.m. every other day, and endless waiting. There's so much uncertainty throughout the process, and waiting to see how many eggs survive, waiting to see if embryos develop, waiting for genetic testing results, waiting to see if implantation works. Every single step feels like you're holding your breath. The process took me 3 years, and I finally became pregnant with Dash at 38. Yes! Even pregnancy itself, it wasn't easy. I developed gestational diabetes, and I thought I was over all the shots. And honestly, I had to give myself shots every day to monitor my blood sugar. And then after Dash was born, I experienced PPD, which is postpartum depression, which taught me how important mental health support and community are for parents. And life also unfolded differently than I originally imagined. Part of my journey has been learning that family doesn't always look the way you pictured it, and learning how to adapt with love and grace when life changes shape. It's been beautiful and hard at the same time. I don't think God promises us easy journeys, but I do believe God meets us in them. Though all the surgeries, waiting, grief, uncertainty, hormones, and postpartum depression, there were many moments when I didn't know if I could handle one more setback. But somehow God kept carrying me forward, and I learned that even in the middle of ruin, renewal was still possible. For me, renewal eventually looked like my son, and he has given me so much more than I could ever have asked for. He is my everything, and I'm so grateful to God for him, and I'm so grateful to this community for accepting us. And I would just want to give a shout out to my partner, Damaris, who helps me raise Dash. Thank you.
Thank y'all so much. Y'all are amazing. It's beautiful to get to be up here and just kind of share this ongoing journey, and so much resonates from y'all's stories, not the least of which is just the sheer effort, just invention, creativity, resources, vision, chutzpah, that just goes into every level of building our families. And, when I don't know if other people have experienced this, but, when you're trying to get pregnant, well-meaning, lovely people in your life will say things like, just relax and, stop trying so hard and it'll happen in its own time. It always kind of happens when you stop trying. But for queer parents, trying so hard is what makes our families possible. So, there was this piece of advice or kind of, counsel or guidance that I came across pretty early on in a book about fertility, pregnancy, and parenting for queer women that I consulted pretty exhaustively from, when I first sort of started thinking about and planning to try to have a baby. That was around 2009, so I was 29. And what also resonated from folk stories was sort of that particular moment when I felt something shift, into being someone who had a sense that I would one day be a parent, but not really knowing what that would look like and not really thinking much about it. I actually was, when we were kind of grounding, when Viv was having us ground, I was really grounding on the sound of the little one in the room, that little kind of like, like this little baby voice in the room. Because I remember that I was actually on a bus in 2009, and I was just sitting by my little single self, and I heard a baby on the bus in that similar way. And in my mind, just this voice went off and said, that could be your baby. Like you could have a baby, you could be the one with a little one sort of cooing on the bus. And in that moment, I sort of went from an abstract idea to something that I started to sort of intentionally start to plan and kind of order my life at that time around. But that piece of kind of counsel that I was holding in my mind and my spirit throughout the process and really beyond went something like, don't be afraid to make a change. Don't be afraid to switch gears and kind of shift the approach that you're taking to getting pregnant or to building your family. And, the sentence that came from was really specifically about the shifts that you might need to make around, changing donors or sort of changing methods to getting pregnant, or eventually maybe considering adoption, those kinds of options specifically, if one is not kind of working, quote unquote, moving on. But it really applied in so many ways in my and in our journey. To start with, I started trying to get pregnant as a single parent by choice. I had chosen a known donor, through the sort of process of thinking about the people in my life, and it was a dear friend, and we were, kind of went through our process and figuring out what that would look like around, at-home insemination. But very early on in that process, I started seeing Tara, who joined the journey kind of already in progress, but early in, kind of a few years along, but early in the kind of trying process. And we eventually shifted to making those decisions together. And we also ended up moving from New York to New Orleans during that time while this was going on, from where my donor was and all this care I had established to a completely, kind of new place, new setting for me. And that's where our just amazing, brilliant, phenomenal daughter, who's now 8, who's down at Kid Stuff, ended up being conceived and born. But after 2.5 years, sort of going back to the known donor piece of trying with him, we ultimately were not successful in getting pregnant. And we kind of lovingly ended that process and shifted to an anonymous donor, which eventually did work. But sort of getting back to that effort aspect, part of trying to get pregnant for me was that every month during that process, you're in that 2-week wait, I was envisioning being pregnant. I was envisioning and thinking about what that baby would be born based on when they were conceived, kind of what their birthday would be, what their sign would be, what was happening in my life at the time that I would carry them through and birth them into, and, what that would be like. Looking around, I thought, these are the people that I'm going to be pregnant around, how are our relationships going to shift? So I really just sort of conjured these very real little ones, sort of made entirely out of intention, that were, ultimately not to be sort of in the physical plane, but they didn't just disappear because I didn't get pregnant. In the sense, I carry them with me still, and they and all my donor and I went through, and all of us went through, are part of me. And I'm really grateful for spaces like this, and glad for them where I can kind of lift up and talk about and recall and hopefully make useful and make meaning of the aspects of that process that shaped me as a queer parent, and that I actually don't want to forget just because they didn't end up with a very specific definition of success.
I get 2 mics, hey. Hi, I'm Tara. So I was not intending to have children. I connected with a woman who was on the journey I witnessed and supported. Early in our relationship, I left NYC to hang out with my aging parent. My mother still attended the Southern Baptist church I grew up in, which was not inclusive, and at times rabidly homophobic. And for me, that was really challenging to get to know myself, to have a relationship with myself in the midst of all of that. So I exposed myself to that community as little as possible. I discovered my mother's silent homophobia and was pained by her attempts to minimize the important relationship I have with Olivia, even as we both cared for her. It's madness, isn't it? Just like, so I was not intending to get married. We got married legally. We are queers holding hands, visible, defying a hurtful, brutal culture of silencing and rendering invisible. Olivia's arduous attempts to become pregnant succeeded. Birth planning and classes and community, because Olivia. I took notes at doctor's appointments, knew her supplements, medical conditions, allergies, and learned what to expect. Understanding that what is convenient and traditional for labor and delivery departments does not necessarily align with the agency of the birthing person or best practices in giving birth. I was not comfortable with a water birth at home. No. No. Our daughter was born in a birthing center of a local hospital with a wonderful, simpatico doctor and a doula, because that was awesome. It really needed that. So we've navigated the rigors of relationship, adulting, creative life, parenting, parents transitioning, moving back to NYC, schooling appropriate for our family, parenting. Did I mention parenting? As she grew, our daughter expressed curiosity about Jesus. Olivia found this community. I am in the process of healing from weaponized religiosity. I am taking breaths and baby steps, and am grateful for the expansiveness of this community.
Hi. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and the only thing I really knew about being queer was like AIDS and don't ask, don't tell. So I didn't really know like what my future would look like. What does it look like to be queer? I came out when I was 17, and I started to build a queer community. But I didn't really know what it meant to fully be like me and be queer, or age and be queer, or to be a parent and to be queer. I couldn't really imagine beyond survival, just existing. But then slowly, socially, things started to shift. Queerness became a little more visible, a little more imaginable. I started realizing I could be queer and be myself. I could be queer and be a teacher. I could be queer and be respected. I could be queer and get married. I actually remember being in a coffee shop when gay marriage passed, and the barista was like, "Are you gonna get married now?" And I was like, "I don't know, maybe." But you know, and so then like early 2000s, my friends started like getting pregnant and being queer, and I was like, wow. I remember a conversation that I had with a friend, and her kids are like running around, and she's telling me all about her pregnancy journey, you know, and like her known donor and like the legalities of it, and IUI. I was like, IUI, IVF. Like, I learned a lot of acronyms that night, you know. But I also learned that you could be queer and have kids. I learned how to imagine something I had never seen before. And, you know, honestly, I think that's one of the greatest gifts of queerness. Because queerness is seeing and living outside of the box. It's hearing stories about yourself and then creating something new, creating your own narrative. It's breaking the mold and rising up from its ruins. Queerness is freedom dreaming for all of us, regardless of your identity. And that night, I realized I could dream about having children and being queer. So I did. I had two. They're down there, I think. Or they might be up there. I don't know where they're at. I'm still learning how to parent. That's also some freedom dreaming right there. So anyway, I have 2 kids with a co-parent. And honestly, it didn't turn out how I imagined, but I love them, and I love my family. I love my life. And I think when things don't turn out how you planned, that's especially queer as well, you know? A few months before having my second child, I had top surgery and I started hormones. And my oldest child, Nikki, has always been like incredibly supportive of my journey, of my gender. And she'll like correct anybody who like says the wrong pronoun. You don't she me in front of Nikki. But she was like, but you're gonna be mommy. I was like, all right. So I'm always gonna be mommy, you know? And I love that because it's so queer. You know, and it really reflects what, something true about family and queerness, right? That 2 things can exist at the same time, right? That I can be mommy and I can be trans masc, right? That I can be mommy and daddy, right? I can be trans and I can be butch, you know? Because gender fluidity lives in my home and it's encouraged. And the beauty of queer family making is that we get to create it ourselves. When I was younger, I thought queerness would limit my life. Instead, it liberated me. It gave me the freedom to imagine and build a world I'd never seen before. And honestly, that's what family is, right? A family member who co-creates the world we want to live in, even if it's just in our home. But we create it. It's our home. I want to end by saying thank you to our elders, right, who struggled and risked their lives so we could dream, so that we could be up on this stage, because it's their stories that help us dream. It's their stories that actually just let us live, right? So I hope that like, our stories on this stage help the next generation to dream even bigger and expansive. So thank you.
Thank you. So, Forefront, can you relate to any of these stories, whether you're queer, straight, femme, trans, non-binary, a parent already, a partner, child-free, single, or longing for a family one day? What's your hope for renewal amid the ruin of the world and structures we live in? We are at 25 minutes, which is generally the sermon limit. Can someone who is a pastor perhaps or tell us whether I should end it here or continue? Because I have 1 minute of story and then we have some theology from, have some time? Okay, so for me, I'll just tell my story real quick. Actually, Reverend Renita, when she first came to Forefront, she told her own story, which I've also checked with her, of pregnancy loss to being child-free. And for me, I never thought biological kids would be possible in my life. And this whole community of Forefront, people like Grace sitting down here, you're all been possibility models for me. And from ruin to renewal, like there are so many Forefront possibility models up here in our pastors, in our community. And it liberated me from a lifetime of heavily gendered pressure on me to bear children when my body and gender just said no to pregnancy. And I thought I'd accepted being child-free. But over time, I realized I still want to be a daddy. And now I'm very deep in the tender unknown. I don't have children or a pregnancy on the way. You know, if you're here and you really don't know what's possible, I'm with you. I have made one little tiny seed of a possibility of an embryo, and someone has offered to carry it. So nothing is guaranteed. Everything's uncertain. It's a huge leap of faith. But whatever happens, ultimately, I hope to build a multi-family commune of friends and partners who all share resources and raise our kids together. So it takes a village, and I don't think it would be possible for me without Forefront. Generally in a sermon, beyond our personal stories, we also try to like zoom out to some of the like theological story. And luckily we have a seminary student and preaching boot camper, M, here to tie us together into the biblical story again. Please share.
Yeah, I sort of got this question of, well, how do you see God's renewal? I think I came up on the wrestle that God's actions are intangible. And then I started looking a little bit deeper and thinking that, God's renewal is found in the actions of God's people. This unrelenting urge to keep dreaming and to keep taking risks, to show up for others and create relationships and communal structures that center our covenant with God, our love for ourselves, and then our love for others. And centering love in general, is always going to come up against the blueprint of empire. But God's people defiantly set a counterculture, that counterculture vision, and we see it in both testaments in the Hebrew Bible just pretty consistently. In the Hebrew Bible, you see in Exodus a people after dislocation without a home, and they dream. They dream about how they'll run their community. These sprawling, multi-generational, familiar, and also based off of kinship communities, but they did that dreaming in a place of exile. They were in Babylon. Their structures were no bigger than 4 rooms. They couldn't even fit anything larger than a quote-unquote nuclear family. And then you see it with Paul. He gets a vision from a revelation from Jesus to say, there have been associations, and these associations have been based off of status in Roman culture, or blood in more ethnic-centered cultures. And he gets a vision that that's not actually the type of kinship we're going to be building here. You're going to go out. It doesn't matter if you're a Greek or a Jew or a Roman. You're going to build it. And he did. And I think that's one of the reasons why uncommon kinship exists for us today. And then the ministry of Jesus. I mean, the structure that he was up against in Roman culture was the pater familias. And that sounds as weird as it is. The family was not a site of relational bonds. It was site of commerce and hierarchy. Women, slaves, indentured servants, you all had your place in where you could go inside this pater familias. And children, don't even get us started. You didn't even create a bond with a child until they were 7 years old, because child mortality was so common. Why would you do that? And then when they were 7, they'd go to work, because you got to add to this idea of commerce. And so just seeing like this child right here and hearing the sounds of children and knowing that in Jesus' ministry, like, who gathered? Children. Do you know how incredible that is? The Savior of the world, the Messiah, cares enough to minister to children and women and all of these different people, no matter hierarchy. Like, that's bomb. Like there's nothing else. There's no other way to say it. And this struggle to have what you want, a dream deferred, is the story of the main characters of our text. You get this idea that if you do all the right things, good things will happen. And then in the inverse, when things don't work out the way that you wanted them, it's because, well, you didn't quite do all the things. But suffering and waiting, that's part of our culture, of our ancestors. And there's no other figure but Jesus who says, if you're waiting, if you're suffering, if you have a dream deferred, I get it. So is mine. I died because of my vision for community. And without Jesus, we still have that Holy Spirit to show up and that quiet voice inside of us or in the people beside us just to say, hey, like, I'm really sorry. This really sucks. This is not what you want. And I'm here.
So to close this out, speaking of community and being here for each other, we wanted to co-create, sort of crowdsource a resource. So we're just going to put up a QR code. We can also drop it in the chat. We can share lots of resources, stories, links, articles, books, anything, because there's so much to this conversation.